Hello everyone, we're here with another fun JavaScript video where I'm going to be tackling the concept of function throttling. It is very much related to debouncing, a video I have done in another little vanilla JavaScript tutorial on. I do suggest you go watch that video at some point as it is directly related to throttling and it's going to actually have a lot of similar code with a little bit of change up. So that video can be found on our YouTube channel, and I'll also make sure it's linked in the description down below. That video was inspired from a question from a student that I shout out in that video, and then this video was inspired by that video. So thanks to the student again for inspiring two videos, technically. So yeah, if you want the code for this tutorial, it'll be in a Codepen, also linked in the description down below. Otherwise, you can make your own simple index HTML, link yourself a style sheet, make a bunch of content you have to scroll through, as that's going to be today's demo. Style it however you like. Just make sure your content is spaced appropriately, just so you have something to actually scroll through, as that's going to be today's tutorial. But like I said, if you want to sit back and just absorb the lesson in this video and then try writing it yourself later, you can always just find the Codepen linked in the description down below. Also, the student that asked that question is part of our community membership program, so you can spend $25 a month to get access to our front-end, back-end, and my React course. I'm also in the works on a TypeScript and database course to add to that list as well. You can learn to be a full-stack programmer and all this and so much more, so make sure you check out, again, a link in the description down below for that community membership offer. So yeah, check that out. Otherwise, let's get going here. So let's define a throttle. So unlike debouncing in the previous video, throttling is about limiting how often a function can run or be executed over, some given period of time. It's incredibly useful for, again, optimizing performance in scenarios where some code needs to run repeatedly, but not too frequently. So remember, debouncing was about delaying a function until some series of actions has fast-tracked or gone through. Throttling would be, if I have a repeated action and this code needs to be running frequently, I want it to run less frequently. Still frequently, but less so. Whereas debouncing was hold off until this repeated stuff is done, then go. This is, hey, all this repeated stuff, run, but not as often as you would. And this can actually be demonstrated very quickly here with our build for today, which I said, just makes, if you want to follow along, just make something you can just scroll with. I have an indicator here, but you can always just do a console log like we did the other day. It doesn't really matter all too much. So clearly, some great use cases for throttling would be scrolling events for animations or API calls or things like that. Window resizing for layout adaptations is also another big one. And if you had any kind of real-time data fetching happening based on any kind of repeated or user action, then it's a good idea to also throttle how much those API calls go out to save our web APIs the time during the people visiting our web app. They don't get hammered by requests constantly, but rather they're throttled to some degree, but still happening often, for example. So yeah, we're going to be focusing on the scroll bar issue, as that's going to be the most common one to take a look at here. So let's go ahead and very quickly do some simple vanilla JavaScript. Let me align my keyboard this time, unlike in the last video, where I'm going to have my indicator, and I believe I have that in the document, the DOM, as get element by ID, or maybe it was a class. I forgot what I did here in today's video. I did a class indicator, so okay, that works. So instead of doing a get element by ID, let's just run a query selector. I'm not going to do a query selector all, since I don't want to grab multiple elements of this class name. I want to grab the only one I have in the DOM, so we'll change it from yesterday. At least when I shot this video. We're going to have some kind of counter that's going to be incrementing over time. This could be, for example, whatever we're indicating, this could be like a number of times the function runs, which is going to be an API call, something performance or operation heavy. That's all it's going to represent. We're going to see this count go up like crazy initially, and then we're going to learn how to throttle it and make sure it goes up, but not as much as it does what we're about to show. So let's write a quick function here. It doesn't really matter. We'll say to the window, to the wall. I want to add an event listener of type scroll. That's the event type. And I wish to run a function that whenever the user scrolls in this window, I want to do something really simple, which is just not console log. We need to take the indicator and switch its text content to be last update count, or last updated count, I guess is grammar. And then we're going to put in the count, and we're also going to increment it every single time right there with a plus plus count. So should show me the initial count and then start scrolling up from there, right? Actually, I think count plus plus is what we want, because this will tell me what it was, not what it's going to be, I believe. So there we go. Let's go ahead and head to the DOM and check it out. So it says scroll to update me. And as we can see, every time I'm scrolling, that little function right there in that event listener is running like crazy. I mean, just in the span of a couple of seconds, I've already incurred 500 iterations of that function running, which if it was performance heavy, poorly optimized, or very resource intensive, or an API call, my poor API has already gotten almost 1,000 calls to it if that's what was happening. And I've barely actually done anything besides I'm just rolling my scroll button as fast, and not fast as I can, but I mean, like, it's just going up and down like crazy, and we can see that indicator, right, going nuts. So this is where our throttle is going to come into place. So unlike the debounce, which would say, hey, wait for me to stop scrolling and then go, I want this one to be running on a frequent and regular basis, but not nearly this fast. I don't want it going to 1,600 times. I would say go, 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 go. Something a bit more delayed, right? So running, but with a delay, or throttled how many times it's actually able to run. So let's go ahead and do it this way, where I'm going to write this function called throttle. There we go, our throttling function today. It's going to take two parameters, the function we are trying to throttle and a limit we want to throttle it by. So again, we get to choose how much we want to throttle it by. Okay, so for the throttle. Now this, unlike yesterday's video, which at this point I also highly recommend you go check that out, as I do a deeper discussion on the keyword this in JavaScript. It's not as important here in the throttle as it was back over in the debounce tutorial, but if you do have some curiosities about what I'm about to write here, I do a deep dive on that in the previous video, so I recommend you go check that out. So let in throttle will basically be a flag that tells me when I am not throttling this code. We're going to be returning an inner function here. Again, and this inner function will come with a closure around in throttle, so we have access to it in this function's scope when it's being ran. And I can say, grab the arguments from the function I'm passing in. I need to grab the context of this in case it happens to be important for this function. As for example, it's being called on an object. I need to make sure the context of this is the object and not the window, for example. And what I need to do is to say, if we are not being throttled, I need to call the function with the appropriate context, which we're going to do with a call to apply, provide the context of this and my arguments to that function, so I can make sure it's called with the correct arguments and the correct context of this, which again, I go over that further in the debouncing video that you can find in the description down below. Then I'm going to set in throttle to be true to make sure this is not reran over and over again, and I'm going to set a timeout, or my throttle, to say, and again, the arrow function won't make any difference here for binding. I don't really care about that. I just want this to toggle this variable back to false after this limit has gone. So this is the code that is going to be throttling our function here. And that is really about it for how simple this needs to be. Now, there are advanced use cases and edge cases you can add to this, but this series is meant for more so for beginners trying to understand some more intermediate concepts and higher, while continuing to use like vanilla JavaScript and not start using build tools like TypeScript, or throwing in like, you know, frameworks and libraries like React, Angular, Vue, and things like that into the mix, where it might confuse y'all. Again, I just want to keep this simple for a couple of videos, as I tend not to do that. So there you go. That is as simple as our throttle function needs to be. And what we're going to do now is take this code. I'm actually going to move it into its own function for visibility. I'll say const update indicator. Again, arrow function here is not as important, so we're going to go ahead and format the document. And then down yonder, I'm going to say, hey, I want to throttle my update indicator function every, let's say, 750 milliseconds, or 3/4 of a second. And there is our throttle function beautifully in use here. So we're going to go ahead and start. Now, remember how many iterations I had when I scrolled like crazy earlier, and watch how much the throttling is going to slow it down. So we can automatically see that that function is still frequently running, but it is not nearly as frequently as it was before. We can really see that that throttle function has really well, like its name implies, throttle that function from running. So our indicator update, remember, could be some kind of resource intensive function. It could be an API call, could be something that adjusts the layout of the page as a user scrolls or something like that. Regardless of what it is, we want it to run, but we don't want it to run 1,600, 5,000, 10,000 times if a user's just scrolling aimlessly for like a good couple minutes. The throttle says, hey, run, but just not as fast as you need, as it would otherwise let you go. So again, this needs to be running at a regular interval or more regular interval as this action keeps occurring. Unlike the debounce, which would say hold off until the user stops scrolling for a moment, this says, hey, if the user keeps scrolling, then keep running this function, but make sure it doesn't run 1.5 times. And yeah, that's really about it. Let's go to the bottom here because, hey, end of content, you did it. This is a much shorter video than yesterday, considering I told y'all I didn't want to go into defining this and all that crazy stuff again in this video, as it'd be really redundant between these last two videos. But from additional learning, you can look into how to add like an immediate execution option, meaning execute it right away and then start throttling afterwards. You can look into trailing options. So like if it's called multiple times, including near the beginning or end of the limit duration, execute it one last time. So basically, like if there's a storm of actions coming in, throttle, and then once the batch of those actions is done, execute one more time. You need to have a way to maybe cancel it if required, so it can be useful in cases where the action might not be necessary after some condition is met. So maybe it's going to be like keep running all of this until you get to the bottom part of the page, then stop because you're not needed anymore or something like that. And then return values, how you can learn to preserve and return values from this throttle function could be some further learning and additional stuff you could check out for throttling function. But again, like this is related to the topic in the previous video, which is debouncing, so I figured it'd make for a fun one here. So hope you all found this helpful in understanding what throttling is and how simple it can be to implement into your code base should you need it. So it's another tool in your tool belt, as I like to tell my students. Remember, if you got any questions or need help with coding, our community membership is here to assist you. If you want to learn some of that full stack development, get custom content like this, and access to help in Discord from myself as like a coding mentor on your journey. So either way, thanks for watching, and make sure all to do the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, all those fun kind of things, and happy coding.